a KeySmash Studios tutorial. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to change the visibility of your resources inside of our interaction areas. After the resource has been interacted with and collected, we're going to have the object be hidden in the scene, and then after a specified amount of time, it's going to become visible again. As you're watching, if you find this video helpful, please remember to like and subscribe. So the first thing we're going to do is open up the My Character script, and we're going to go over to the header, and then we're going to go back to our canInteract function to add another argument. This one is going to be a reference to our resource object. So it's going to be a actor, a pointer, and then we're going to just call it resource. And then just like with the other parameters of this function, we want to create a property within the class so that way we can keep that value. So I'm going to do uProperty, and it needs to be an aActor as well. And then I'm going to call this one area object. And that's all we're doing for the header of my character. So now we can go over to our CPP. And we can scroll down to our canInteract function and add in this new argument. So aActor, pointer, resource. And then what we want to do, because some of our interaction areas don't actually have a resource, for instance our fishing, we don't have an object for that type of interaction area, so there won't be a visible resource that we can use. And because of that, we need to be checking when aActor resource is null. So we'll do if resource. Then we can go ahead and take our area object and set it equal to our resource that was passed in. And again, we're doing this for when there's instances where resource is null. We don't have to take the time to set the resource to our area object when resource doesn't exist. And that's all the additions for canInteract. So now we can go down to collect from area. And what we're wanting to do here is after we've collected from the area and added these items to our inventory, we want to go ahead and take the actor that's inside that area and set it inactive. And so the way we do that is first by checking that area object exists. Again, there will be instances where it doesn't, like for fishing. And then after we've determined that it's not null, we can go ahead and take that area object and set the actor hidden in game to be true. And this will make it to where the mesh is no longer visible, but our collision will still be there, and we don't want the collision to be there either. So that we're going to do, again, area object, this time set actor, enable collision to false. And all these two lines are doing is making it to where the object disappears and the player can no longer run into the collision of that object. And this is all that we're going to be doing for the My Character script, so now we can go ahead and go over to the header of our interaction area. And the first thing we want to do inside this is add a tick function. The reason we're adding tick is because we want to create a delay to be used so that way we can make our object visible in the scene again after a specified amount of time. So to add the tick function, you're going to do virtual void tick float delta time override. And we want some new properties so that way we can handle the delay as well as holding a reference to the object for this specific interaction area. So we'll start with the object, so it's going to be uProperty edit anywhere. And then it's an aActor, and it's a pointer, and we're going to call this one resource as well. And then we need to do our properties for our delay. So uProperty, the first one is going to be float delay. And this property will be the value of time that we want to delay. And then the next uProperty is going to be our counter. It's also going to be a float. And this is what we will add the delta time value to continue counting up until we reach the delay. And that's all for the header of the interaction area. So now we can go over to our CPP for this class. And the first thing we want to do is inside our constructor, and we want to make it to where our canTick is true. So the way you do that is through primary actor tick. And then you're going to do dot bCanEverTick and just set that to true. And then we want to go ahead and just give defaults to our delay and counter. So our delay, I'm just going to default to 3. Again, this is the number that's going to say how long your object is hidden in the scene before it reappears. You want this number to be the time between the collection of your object and the respawning of that object. And I'm using a low number so that way you can quickly see that it generates again and we don't have to sit around and wait a while. And our other property that we need to give a default to is our counter, and we're going to default it to 0. And now we can go ahead and add in our tick function. So it's going to be void a interaction area tick, and then again float delta time. And then you want to make sure that you use the super of tick so it works properly. And then inside this, what we're wanting to do is see if our resource is no longer visible in the scene. If it's not, we want to start adding to our counter until it reaches the delay value. And then we want to set this object back visible in the scene and then restart our counter. So the first thing we want to do for that is make sure that our resource exists. Again, our fishing spots won't have a resource, so we don't want this code to be running for those areas. And then after we've determined that this interaction area does have a physical resource, we want to see if the resource has collision. So we're going to do resource, get actor, enable collision. And we want to make sure that we're taking the not of that value, because if it doesn't have collision, that means it's not visible in the scene. And whenever it's not visible in the scene is when we're wanting to handle the code for respawning it. So the first thing we want to do is add to our counter. So we're going to do counter plus equals delta time. And for those who aren't aware, delta time is the amount of time that has passed since the previous frame. So we're just going to each frame, which is when tick is called, add that amount of time to our counter. And we're going to continue adding that amount of time while our object isn't visible in the scene until our counter is greater than our delay. And once our counter is greater than our delay, then we know the specified amount of time that we want between our deactivating and reactivating of our object has passed, and so we'll go ahead and reactivate the object. So we're going to do resource, and then it's SetActorHiddenInGame. And this time it's going to be false. We no longer want it to be hidden in the game. And then we also need to add our collision back. So again, resource, set actor enable collision to true. And then we also want to restart our counter, so that way if the player collects from the specific area again, we won't have the counter already above the delay. It'll go back to 0 and repeat the process. And now that our tick's done, we can go down to our enter and exit areas and handle adding the resource to our canInteract call. But with our enter area, before we call the canInteract function, we actually want to make sure that we're supposed to. In other words, the resource actor isn't hidden in scene. But because some of our objects won't have a resource, we can't just check that the resource's collision is there, similar to how we did in the tick function. So we're going to add to our if character if statement. What we're wanting to do first is actually check that we don't have a resource. And the reason we're checking that we don't have a resource is because for our fishing, we won't have one. And so we don't want to be checking if there's a collision on that resource in case it's null. So if we don't have a resource, then we're good to go ahead and go in. But the next thing that we want to make sure is that if we do have a resource, in other words, the first part of this or statement is false, then we can go ahead and take our resource and check to see if it has collision. So again, what we're doing here is we're checking first that the character exists. And if the character exists, then we want to make sure one or the other is true inside the statement. Either our resource is null and we don't need to check the resource's collision, or the resource exists and then we check to make sure that there is in fact collision on that resource. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and add the resource to our canInteract call. So we're just going to add resource, and then for our exit area, as it doesn't really matter when we're exiting the area, we can just add null. And that's all of the code for the interaction area. However, I've realized that I forgot a singular line of code in my character, so I'm going to go back to the CPP of that, and then I'm going to take our canInteract and set it to false. And the reason I'm adding this is so that way after we've interacted with the area, we can't interact again. Without this line of code, we'd be able to continue collecting from that area even if the object was gone, as long as we didn't exit the box first, because that's when can interact is set to false. And I just want to set it inside of collect area as well now, so that way if I don't exit the box after I collect from it, I can't continue collecting from it after the object is gone. And now that is in fact all of the code for this tutorial, so we can go ahead and go back to the scene. We can go ahead and compile our code. And now that it's successfully compiled, we can go ahead and mess around with our scene. And what I discovered during my practice run was that the ticks on the old ones don't actually work, so I'm just going to replace them all real quick with new interaction areas. I'm just going to drag them in and then copy over all the information from that onto this new one, and then I'll go through with you adding the resource. And so I went ahead and re-added in all the interaction areas and made sure that the previous values match the new values. To my understanding, you have to re-add them in because the constructor is called when you add it into the scene, and so when we set tick to be true in the constructor, the old ones didn't have that, and so they don't call on their tick, but when you recreate them, it calls on that constructor and sets the tick to be called. But now that we have that sorted out, we can go ahead and add in the resource. So for my small tree, I'm going to add in my small pine tree, and then for my small rock, I'm going to add in my small rock. And for my large tree, I'm going to add in my large pine tree, and my large rock for that area, and then again for fishing we just leave it as none. So now we can go ahead and save and test and play. So now if I go over to this tree and click F to chop, once the interaction has completed, the tree goes away, and if I wait the few seconds, the tree comes back. So as a recap, we used a reference to our resource object so that way we could set it hidden in game after we've interacted with it, and then we used the tick function inside of our interaction areas to create a delay for how long it would be inactive in the scene, and then after that delay has ended, switch it back to visible so the player can interact with it again. As always, I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments, or you can join our Discord and ask them there. We make videos here every Wednesday and Saturday, but we also stream games on Twitch. Along with that, we've created our own application called Blastoff, which you can get on the Google Play Store, and we've created a Unity asset pack of kids' toys, as well as a Patreon. If you'd like to support us in any of those ways, or if any of those things interest you, be sure to check them out in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.